LoRa radio, and Meshtastic mesh networking from the physical layer up. This is a technical look at how these devices actually work: chirp spread spectrum modulation, managed flood routing as it ships today, and the encryption model, including where it is genuinely strong and where it is not. If you already know what a repeater and a router are on a normal IP network, we are going to build on that, not re-explain it. LoRa parts. First, the LoRa physical layer, chirp spread spectrum, spreading factor, bandwidth, and coding rate, and how those three combine into a link budget. Second, how Meshtastic actually routes a packet across a mesh today, including a routing change from firmware 2.6 and a role deprecation from firmware 2.7 that most existing tutorials have not caught up with yet. Third, encryption, channel keys, the newer public key direct messages, and what is deliberately left unencrypted. Fourth, the practical stuff: MQTT bridging, firmware updates, and an honest list of limitations for public safety use. Start with the physical layer. LoRa is Semtech's proprietary modulation, and it is a derivative of chirp spread spectrum. A chirp is a signal that sweeps linearly across the channel's bandwidth over one symbol period, either upward or downward in frequency. Each symbol encodes data as a cyclic shift of that base chirp's starting frequency. Because a timing offset and a frequency offset look equivalent to a chirp-based receiver, LoRa demodulation is comparatively simple to implement, and it is naturally resistant to Doppler shift and multipath fading. The processing gain comes from spreading. Each symbol is one of 2 to the SF possible chirp starting frequencies, where SF is the spreading factor. That is a lot of distinguishable states per symbol, and it is what lets a receiver pull a LoRa signal out of noise well below the noise floor at the cost of raw bitrate. Meshtastic exposes spreading factors 7 through 12 on most hardware, and down to 5 on newer second-generation chips. Every step up in spreading factor doubles the airtime for a given payload, and adds roughly 2.5 decibels of link budget. More range and better sensitivity, less throughput, longer time on air, and more battery drain per message. 2 more knobs: bandwidth and coding rate. Meshtastic supports channel bandwidths from about 31 kHz up to over a MHz on the newer wideband chips, with 125 kHz as the common default on sub-GHz hardware. Narrower bandwidth concentrates energy and improves sensitivity. At the cost of data rate, bandwidths below about 62 kHz may need a temperature-compensated crystal oscillator on some hardware to hold frequency stable enough to matter. Coding rate is LoRa's forward error correction, written as 4 over 4 plus NN. A coding rate of 4/5 is light protection. 4/8 adds substantially more redundancy, trading throughput for resilience against interference and fading. Meshtastic bundles spreading factor, bandwidth, and coding rate into named modem presets, so you rarely set the 3 independently. They run from short turbo, the fastest and shortest range preset, not legal in every region, down through short fast, short slow, medium slow, to long fast, which is the default, and the radio profile behind the public long fast channel almost everyone starts on. Below that, long moderate, long slow, and very long slow, trading more and more throughput for range. Across the whole family, data rates span roughly 0.2 of a kilobit per second up to about 22 kilobits per second. This is not a broadband link. It never will be, and that is by design. Region matters, and it is not just a label. Meshtastic's US region targets the 902 to 928 MHz band under FCC, Part 15.247. There is no duty cycle limit under that rule. Instead, the FCC controls channel occupancy through frequency hopping and occupancy time rules. Meshtastic documents a maximum of plus 30 dBm effective radiated power for North America. Europe is a different regime entirely. ETSI rules cap EU 868 at plus 27 dBm, and Meshtastic's own firmware self-enforces a 10% hourly duty cycle on EU 433 and EU 868 to comply, recalculated on a rolling basis. A US 915 device and a European 868 device are not on the same frequencies. They cannot talk to each other. Region is not a cosmetic setting. On top of the legal limit, Meshtastic firmware also self-throttles based on measured channel utilization independent of region to protect mesh health from any one talkative node. Developer and community sources describe non-priority transmissions getting delayed once channel utilization climbs past roughly a quarter, with router role nodes further suppressing their own telemetry above roughly 40%. I want to be upfront that those 2 specific percentages come from developer forum discussion, not an official specification page, so treat them as approximately right rather than an exact published threshold. The behavior itself, a mesh that backs off as it gets busier, is real and is documented. So, what actually determines your real-world range? 4 things. Transmit power, capped by region as we just covered. Antenna gain at both ends, which adds directly to your link budget in the favored direction. Meshtastic's published numbers assume a 0 dBi reference antenna, so a real gain antenna does better than the table implies. Receiver sensitivity, which improves with spreading factor as we covered a minute ago. And ordinary path loss and Fresnel zone clearance obstruct the first Fresnel zone and a link degrades sharply even with visual line of sight. None of that last part is Meshtastic specific, it is how ultra-high frequency radio behaves everywhere. Now the architecture. Meshtastic's configuration protocol defines 13 device role values in total. 2 of them, router, client, and repeater, are deprecated legacy roles. We'll get to repeaters deprecation specifically since a lot of existing tutorials still treat it as current. The everyday ones, client is the default and is right for the vast majority of nodes. It rebroadcasts a packet only when no other node has already done so. Client mute sends and receives its own traffic, but never rebroadcasts anyone else's, which suits a handheld sitting near a strong node. Client hidden broadcasts only as needed for stealth or power savings. And client base is a personal base station. It always rebroadcasts for its favorited nodes and behaves like a normal client for everything else. Then the specialized roles. Tracker prioritizes broadcasting its own GPS position. Sensor prioritizes broadcasting telemetry. Talk and TAC tracker are tuned for ATalk interoperability, which we will come back to, and they reduce routine mesh chatter to make room for position traffic. And Lost and Found regularly broadcasts its own location as a plain text message on the default channel, specifically to help you recover a misplaced device. None of these change how routing works. They change what a node prioritizes sending. And the infrastructure roles, where I need to flag something recent and something easy to misread if you're coming from IP networking. Router always rebroadcasts once and becomes a preferred relay for the mesh. But don't let the name fool you. This isn't doing route table lookups the way an IP router does. There's no path computation here. It's a flag priority flag, always relay this, full stop. Router late does the same, but only after every other node's rebroadcast attempt has had a chance, specifically to cut collision risk from infrastructure nodes. Official guidance is explicit that overusing either role across many nodes increases collisions and reduces delivery rates. It is not a coverage switch you flip for free. Here is the recent part, the repeater role, which a lot of existing tutorials still describe as the standard way to build an infrastructure node, was deprecated in firmware 2.711 in October 2025. Current guidance points you to router, router late, or client base instead, depending on placement. If you learned Meshtastic infrastructure design from an older guide, this is the one thing in this video most likely to be new to you. One more architectural point before we get to routing. Every node has exactly one primary channel, channel 0, created at setup, it cannot be disabled, and periodic position, telemetry, and node info broadcasts go out on it by default. A node supports up to 8 total channels, so channels 1 through 7 are optional, each with its own name and its own key, for segmenting traffic, a private group layered alongside the public default, for instance. And here is a detail worth knowing, a hash of the primary channel's name is what determines the actual LoRa frequency slot in use. 2 devices need to agree on more than just region to talk. The primary channel name effectively picks the frequency. Now, how a packet actually crosses the mesh. One thing worth being explicit about, first, Meshtastic is not LoRaWAN. LoRaWAN is a separate protocol that also runs on LoRa radios, but it uses a star topology, fixed gateways, and no peer-to-peer relaying. Meshtastic runs its own protocol directly on raw LoRa radios instead, and every node can relay for every other node. That's what we're about to walk through. Meshtastic's own documentation calls this managed flooding, deliberately not just flooding. When a node receives a packet with a non-zero hop limit, it decrements the count and rebroadcasts on the sender's behalf, unless it has already heard another node do so first. That listen before rebroadcast step is the managed part. Watch hop 1, node A originates, and the 2 nodes within direct range, B and C, have already rebroadcast. D, E, and F have not received the packet yet. 1 hop later, B and C's rebroadcasts have reached D, E, and F. Each of them will now decide independently whether to rebroadcast again, decrementing the hop limit once more. This is where Meshtastic's contention mechanism matters most, which is next. So why doesn't this turn into a broadcast storm the moment a mesh gets dense? Contention. Before rebroadcasting, a node waits out a randomized window sized by the signal-to-noise ratio of the packet it just received. A weak, low signal-to-noise reception implies you are far from the original sender, so you get a short window and you tend to transmit first, extending coverage. A strong, nearby reception gets a longer window. By the time it would fire, it has usually already heard someone else's rebroadcast and suppresses its own. Distant nodes go first, nearby nodes stand down. That is the core trick that makes flooding efficient instead of chaotic. Duplicate suppression backs it up. Every node tracks packets by originating node number plus packet ID, and will not relay the same pair twice. Because per recipient acknowledgement of a broadcast would itself flood the channel, Meshtastic does not do that. Instead, hearing any node rebroadcast your message, whether or not that node can even decrypt it, counts as implicit confirmation the packet is propagating. That is not a delivery guarantee to any specific destination. It only tells you the packet left your local radio neighborhood. Keep that distinction in mind, we will come back to it in the limitations section. Hop limit defaults to 3, and the field allows up to 7. Official guidance is to leave it at 3 unless you have a specific understood reason to raise it, and to apply any increase only at edge nodes, not in the center of your mesh, because higher hop counts raise collision risk and lower delivery rates for everyone. Firmware 2.6 added something genuinely new here, next hop routing, but only for direct messages, not broadcast traffic. Instead of every node in earshot attempting to rebroadcast a direct message, only the one stored next hop node relays it, hop by hop. If that expected relay isn't heard, firmware falls back to managed flooding on that hop as a safety net. Broadcast and channel traffic still use pure managed flooding as we just covered. This optimization is specifically for one-to-one messages. Encryption, starting with the channel you're on by default. Meshtastic encrypts every packet payload with AES-256 in CTR mode, using a key derived from that channel's pre-shared key. Anyone who has the channel name and key can decrypt traffic on it and, as matters, can also forge traffic on it. There is no separate authentication step in this original scheme. Here is the part every operator on this default channel needs to know explicitly. The primary channel ships with a publicly known default key, a single byte, hex 01. That is the key behind the public long-fast channel every new device joins out of the box. Because that key is published in the open source firmware itself, anyone can decrypt and forge default channel traffic. This is intentional. It gives you an interoperable public mesh on day one. If you want real confidentiality, change the pre-shared key or create a private secondary channel. Key length options are no encryption at all, AES-128 or AES-256. Direct messages are a different and newer story, public key cryptography, added in firmware 2.5.0. Two nodes each hold a curve 25519 key pair, and a Diffie-Hellman exchange derives a shared secret between them, with no central certificate authority. The first public key a node hears for a given node number is the one it trusts going forward, trust on first use. The message content is then protected with symmetric encryption keyed from that shared secret, and signed with the sender's private key for authenticity. I'll note honestly that Meshtastic's own documentation describes the symmetric step as AES in CTR or CCM mode without fully committing to one, so I won't claim more precision than the source material gives me. Remote admin, reconfiguring a node over the mesh instead of locally, rides that same public key channel. A curve 25519 exchange sets up a session, and each session gets a short-lived session ID, documented at roughly 300 seconds, specifically to prevent replay attacks. But local access is a completely different trust boundary. Meshtastic's own technical reference says plainly that a device's local, API, Bluetooth, USB serial, Wi-Fi grants full access configuration, keys, decrypted traffic entirely outside the on-air encryption model. The docs explicitly warn against administering a node over untrusted Wi-Fi for exactly this reason. Physical and Bluetooth security of the device matters as much as the radio link. What is deliberately left unprotected? Meshtastic's documentation states plainly that the packet header is always sent unencrypted so that a relaying node can route a packet it cannot itself decrypt. That means node identifiers, packet IDs, hop count, and channel hash are visible in the clear to any listener, even when the payload is encrypted. Traffic analysis, who is talking to whom, how often, and roughly, where via signal strength, is not defended against by this encryption model at all. That is a real documented gap, not an oversight I am inferring. Meshtastic's own limitations page lists these as accepted tradeoffs, not bugs, no central key signing authority, so a node cannot cryptographically detect impersonation of a brand new identity, a node database capped around 100 entries, so an attacker can flood fake nodes to evict real ones, and on the original pre-shared key channel scheme, no message authentication at all, meaning anyone holding that key can forge a message that appears to come from anyone else on the channel. The project's own documentation calls these anticipated and accepted, given the goal of a decentralized ad hoc mesh with no infrastructure requirement. And those trade-offs are not theoretical. 2 real vulnerabilities landed in 2025. CVE 25-52464 firmware 2.520 through 26.1 had a combination of some vendors' flashing procedures producing duplicated curve 25519 key pairs across multiple physical devices, plus keys generated before the random number generator had enough entropy, letting an attacker with a list of known weak keys decrypt direct messages. Fixed in 2.6.1 and 2.6.12. CVE 2025-55292 firmware up to 26.2 allowed node identity spoofing in unencrypted ham mode node info, letting an attacker overwrite entries in another node's local database. Fixed in 2.7.6. If you run infrastructure nodes for public safety, this is a concrete, not hypothetical, argument for staying current on firmware. Bridging to the internet, a Wi-Fi or Ethernet node can act as an MQTT client, uplinking mesh packets to a broker and downlinking broker messages back onto the mesh. With no server configured, Meshtastic defaults to its own public broker using a documented shared login. Here is the critical and easy to miss part: whether traffic is encrypted on the MQTT side is a separate setting from your channel's pre-shared key. If that setting is off, the bridging node forwards your messages to the broker unencrypted, even if your mesh channel itself has a key set. A separate TLS setting protects the connection to the broker itself, independent of that. And the JSON output option is documented as never encrypted under any settings. Nodes can also publish an unencrypted map report, position and hardware info at a minimum interval of 1 hour with configurable position precision, defaulting to a fairly coarse deviation on purpose. On the default public channel, the public broker further caps shared location precision to 10 to 16 bits, an intentionally imprecise location as a privacy backstop. Plain summary for operators, bridging to MQTT, especially the shared public broker, meaningfully increases your exposure. Node identities, message content if encryption is off or you're on the default key, and approximate positions can become visible to anyone subscribed. If privacy matters for your deployment, run your own private broker. Firmware updates depend on your hardware family. NR-F52840 devices support Bluetooth over-the-air updates, plus drag-and-drop UF2 updates through the bootloader. RP2040 devices typically use that same UF2 drag-and-drop method. ESP32 devices have historically not supported true wireless app-triggered updates and are generally reflashed over USB. I want to be honest about a gap here. I could not find an official Meshtastic page that fully specifies the firmware signing scheme, whether it's a cryptographic signature or just an integrity check, or whether self-compiled firmware is restricted at all. Given this is a fully open-source project where users routinely self-compile and flash over USB, treat on-device signature enforcement, if it exists at all, as an open question, not a locked-down guarantee. And practically, a failed over-the-air update can leave a device needing physical access to recover, worth remembering for a node mounted somewhere hard to reach. A few modules that matter specifically for public safety work. Range test. One fixed node sends sequential packets every 30 to 60 seconds. A mobile node logs each received packet with its own GPS position to a CSV file, useful for characterizing real coverage before you rely on it operationally. Store and forward. A client that stepped out of range briefly can request missed messages be resent, but only an ESP32 device with onboard PSRAM can act as the server, because history storage needs the extra memory. Detection sensor watches a GPIO pin for a transition and sends a text alert, a straightforward way to wire Meshtastic into a perimeter or door contact alert. And ATalk. Meshtastic interoperates with ATalk, iTalk, and other cursor on target clients over the mesh, with no cellular or internet backhaul required. The talk and talk tracker roles we covered earlier optimize a node specifically for this. A companion ATalk plugin translates between cursor on target and Meshtastic's own message format and splits oversized payloads to fit LoRa's small packet size. One version note that matters if you're planning this: basic position and chat needs firmware 2.3 or newer, but the full TAK version 2 wire format needs firmware 2.8.0 or newer. That is a real gate, not a nice to have. Check your firmware before you plan an integration around it. Last privacy lever, position precision. Smart Position Broadcast adjusts how often a node transmits its own location, more often in motion, throttled while stationary, factoring in the channel's data rate so position doesn't dominate available airtime. Separately, a per-channel position, precision setting, 0 to 32, controls how much location detail is actually sent on that channel. 0 means no location, ever, on that channel. 32 means full GPS precision. Everything between is a deliberate coarsening, an operator-controlled lever, full precision on a private tactical channel, heavily obscured or none at all on a public one. Before we close, the honest limitations stated plainly because you're the audience that needs them stated plainly. No delivery guarantee, as covered. Broadcast acknowledgement only confirms a packet left your local radio neighborhood, not that any specific recipient got it. Genuinely limited capacity. LoRa's raw bit rate stays well under 22 kilobits per second, even at the fastest preset. This is a shared contended half-duplex medium, not a scalable data network, and piling on router family roles or high hop counts actively hurts capacity rather than helping it. In Europe specifically, the 10% duty cycle caps your throughput in a way US deployments simply don't face. The encryption story is not, quote, military grade. It is a documented set of accepted tradeoffs: no authentication on the original channel scheme, no protection of routing metadata, a trust on first use model with no central authority, and no official statement I could find, positive or negative, on FIPS validation. So treat that as an open question, not a claim either way. And latency is not real-time conversational. Expect roughly a second for a single quiet hop on a fast preset, scaling up to many seconds or more across multiple hops, a busy channel, or a slower long-range preset. I could not find one authoritative published number for typical end-to-end latency, so bench test it for your own deployment, rather than trusting a figure from a forum post, including this one. To close. LoRa gives you long range and good sensitivity by spending bandwidth and time on air, tunable through spreading factor, bandwidth, and coding rate. Meshtastic's managed flooding, backed by SNR-based contention, gets a real mesh out of that physical layer without central infrastructure, and firmware 2.6 and 2.7 changed real things: next hop routing for direct messages, and the repeater roles deprecation that most existing material has not caught up with yet. And the encryption model is honest about its own limits, strong where it's strong, and explicitly, deliberately open about traffic metadata and local access. Go verify the specifics that matter for your deployment against the current meshtastic.org documentation before you build on them. This project ships fast, and today's numbers may already have moved by the time you're watching this.